Hey guys, tonight we're plunging headfirst into the ironclad misery of Victorian prisons, a place somehow less comfortable than your old futon and about as private as a public restroom at Coachella. Forget all those stylish costume dramas. Tonight, we're talking about what life was actually like behind bars in the 1800s. Hard labour, soggy bread, uniforms that could exfoliate your skin off, and a yard that's just a gravel pit for shuffling around in circles, while a man with a moustache glares at you for breathing too loudly. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how many doors you've locked behind you today, hopefully just one. Now dim those lights, put on a fan for some soothing white noise, and pull your blanket tight. Maybe tuck your feet in, just in case the rats of your imagination get bold. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it really felt like to spend a day in a Victorian prison? Did people actually break rocks all day? Or was that just a creative misunderstanding? Were the uniforms actually made of recycled sandpaper? How did anyone survive on gruel so bland it could double as wall paste? And just how many times can a guard say no talking before it starts to feel personal? Would you be able to keep your sanity sleeping in a cell with a chamber pot and a roommate named Spoons? And now congratulations, you've just woken up in 1875. Your bed is a hammock made of hope, your shoes are 2 left feet, and breakfast is, well, let's not talk about breakfast yet. Good luck. The day begins with a bell so loud it could startle the dead back into crime. You snap awake in your cell, instantly aware of 3 things. Your neck hurts, your cellmate's feet have migrated into your personal space, and the cold stone beneath you is more supportive than any therapist. The guard's boots echo down the hallway, and you remember, this isn't a bad dream, it's just Tuesday. The air is somehow colder than your last breakup. You try to stretch, but the blanket, which weighs about as much as a regret, doesn't reach far enough to cover your toes. Somewhere, a distant voice is already yelling, "Wake up," as if the clanging bell wasn't enough of a subtle hint. Above you, your cellmate emits a sound that's halfway between a snore and a warning to evacuate. In the Victorian prison ecosystem, personal space is a myth, like hope or hot water. You take a breath, immediately regretting it. The aroma in your cell can best be described as historic. There's the damp, earthy scent of ancient stone, the sharp tang of last night's cabbage, and a faint undercurrent of wet wool and unwashed ambition. It's not that anyone's trying to smell this way, it's just that laundry day happens less often than solar eclipses. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice the cell's architectural highlights. 1 barred window, frosted naturally, 1 rickety stool, a chamber pot in the corner radiating quiet menace, and the world's least cheerful patch of straw masquerading as a mattress. The wall opposite you features a small message scratched into the stone by a previous occupant. Help, you find yourself agreeing. The bell rings again, as if determined to make its point. Down the corridor, keys jangle and boots stomp, reminding you that whatever time it is, it's far too early for enthusiasm. The guards are already at full volume, bellowing orders with the sort of joy only possible when you hold absolute power and a very large stick. You sit up, rubbing your neck, feeling every inch of your body protest like a union on strike. Your bed, such as it is, has not improved overnight. Victorian prison mattresses are stuffed with straw and occasionally surprises. Sometimes it's a wayward feather. Sometimes it's last week's bread crust. Either way, you start your day itchy, gritty, and deeply suspicious of anything that moves under the blanket. Outside the bars, you hear the first coughs and groans of your fellow inmates, echoing up and down the corridor like the world's worst choir practice. Someone further down tries to start a conversation, but is met with a barked, "No talking," from a guard whose mood can best be described as perpetually disappointed father. You quickly remember silence is survival. So is moving fast enough to avoid drawing attention, but not so fast that it looks like you're up to something. A ritual unfolds, cell doors creak open one by one, and the parade begins. You shuffle out, clutching your blanket, blinking in the grey morning light. The floor is freezing, your breath turns to mist, and you join the slow-moving procession of prisoners, all with the same thought in their eyes. Maybe today will be different. It won't. As you queue up for roll call, you can't help but notice the little things. The guard who always counts wrong the first time. The inmate in front of you who somehow manages to look even sleepier than you feel. The distant, hopeful sound of birdsong drifting in from somewhere. just loud enough to remind you there's a world beyond these walls, and yet, in this chilly parade of regret, there's an odd sense of camaraderie. You exchange glances with the guy 2 cells down, the one who claims he was arrested for stealing a loaf of bread but who probably just got caught with a sarcastic attitude. In the small, silent ways you realise you're not alone. So begins your Victorian prison day. Not with a sunrise, but with a siren. Not with gentle waking, but with the subtle encouragement of a guard banging on the bars. You wonder, just for a moment, what would happen if you rolled over and ignored it all. But then the guard's shadow falls across your doorway and you know better. In Victorian prison, the only thing that sleeps in is regret. Take a look around. 4 stone walls, a window smaller than your last raise, and furniture that appears to have been designed for a minimalist hamster. The mattress is straw, the blanket is woven from leftover disappointment, and privacy. You have about as much as a goldfish at a pet store. The cell isn't just cramped, it's creatively cramped. The bed, if you're feeling generous with the word, occupies 1 wall, while a stool crouches in the corner as if apologising for existing. There's a chamber pot lurking nearby, ready to remind you at any hour that dignity is not included in the Victorian prison package. If you're lucky, the ceiling only leaks on days ending in Y. If you're unlucky, you've developed a 6th sense for the sound of water hitting stone, followed by the sensation of a surprise cold drip directly down the back of your neck at 2 a.m. Your single-barred window is placed strategically above eye level, as if the architects feared you might get ideas. It lets in the faintest slice of daylight, which means you always know exactly how much time you have left before the next disappointment arrives. The view? If you balance on the bed and tilt your head just right, you might catch a glimpse of sky. Or, more likely, the world's least inspirational brick wall. Some days, you swear the bricks are moving just to mock you. The walls themselves are a patchwork of histories. You can trace generations of frustration by the graffiti etched into the stone, initials, tally marks, and a surprisingly detailed sketch of a pigeon wearing a tiny hat. Some enterprising soul once attempted to write out the lyrics to God Save the Queen, but only made it 3 lines before presumably losing the will to continue. The rest is just scratches, dents, and the universal symbol for why me. Your mattress, such as it is stuffed with straw that migrates every time you roll over. It crackles, pokes, and occasionally provides sanctuary for wildlife you'd rather not acknowledge. It's the kind of bedding that makes you question whether comfort is really necessary for sleep, or just an overrated luxury. The blanket, meanwhile, is the colour of sadness and the texture of a cat's tongue. It covers exactly half of your body at a time, and never the half you want. Let's talk about storage. There isn't any. If you're fortunate enough to have personal possessions, a letter from home, a smuggled scrap of pencil, maybe a button you're emotionally attached to, they're stashed under your mattress, or tucked into a secret nook behind a loose stone. There's always the risk of a cell search, which is less CSI, Victorian edition, and more watch a guard shake out your straw mattress while you practice looking innocent. If you have a cellmate, your spatial awareness becomes ninja level. 2 people, 1 straw bed, and a floor space smaller than most broom closets. Negotiating who gets the good side of the cell, less draft further from the chamber pot, is a delicate social dance that involves equal parts diplomacy, intimidation, and strategic napping. You learn to value silence, patience, and the ability to sleep while balancing on the edge of a creaking plank. Privacy, as previously mentioned, is a distant fantasy. Everything, sleeping, eating, thinking, regretting, happens in full view of anyone unlucky enough to be assigned the same cell. Even your emotional breakdowns need to be scheduled around your cellmate's nap time. Sometimes you catch yourself yearning for just 1 door you could close and call your own. Then you remember, you do have a door. It just happens to be made of iron bars. At night the cell transforms. Moonlight creeps in through the bars, throwing dramatic shadows on the walls. Sounds from other cells, snores, mutters, the mournful clank of a bucket, remind you that the shoebox for the spirit isn't just your home. It's an entire world of cramped lives, all stacked together. In the dark, you lie back on your straw mattress, wrap yourself in that reluctant blanket, and wonder what tomorrow's draft will bring. Still, you find ways to cope. You count bricks. You invent games with dust motes. You memorize every crack in the ceiling and give each one a name. If nothing else, you discover that the human spirit, when crammed into a shoebox, tends to decorate. And when the morning bell rings, you'll still be here, bored, cold, and weirdly proud of the tiny pigeon etched above your head. Time to get dressed. The Victorian prison uniform is less outfit and more itch simulator. Coarse wool tunic, baggy trousers, and a cap so tight it could launch a headache into orbit. Fashion Week this is not. Every morning you face your uniform with the enthusiasm of a cat being shown a bath. The tunic, a sort of scratchy, one-size-fits-none sack, is dyed a colour somewhere between overcooked porridge and depression. The seams are bulky, the sleeves are short, and the collar is a masterclass in how to turn neck skin into sandpaper. The trousers, meanwhile, hang at an angle that suggests they were tailored by someone with a deep grudge against knees. Pull them up, and you discover that Victorian sizing philosophy was, let's just guess and hope they don't complain. The cap is the finishing touch, a sort of woolen vise that compresses your hopes and dreams along with your hair. If you're lucky, it's only mildly itchy. If you're not, it doubles as a tool for exfoliation and personality reduction. Adjusting the cap is an art. Too far down and you can't see, too far up and the guard thinks you're being cheeky. Now for footwear. If shoes are provided at all, they're 2 blocks of leather that were last soft around the same time Queen Victoria was born. They creak, pinch, and have the flexibility of an unpaid tax bill. Some poor souls make do with ill-fitting boots, while others get nothing more than wooden clogs, perfect if your main crime was wanting to hear yourself clatter ominously down the hallway. The uniform, you quickly realise, serves several purposes. It robs you of individuality, for one. There are no fashion statements in prison except for the occasional patch, where someone tried to repair a tear with hope and thread. Everyone matches, everyone's equally uncomfortable. If you're hoping to spot your friend in the crowd, good luck. Everyone looks like they're on their way to the world's most underfunded marching band. And forget pockets. Why would you need those? Anything remotely useful, handkerchief, crumb, secret message, is swiftly confiscated during inspections. Your best hope for storage is tucking a contraband toothpick into your sleeve and praying the itchiness doesn't make you drop it. Any dreams of accessorizing are dashed the moment the guard gives you a glare for rolling up your cuffs. Laundry day, if it happens at all, is less a celebration of cleanliness and more a group exercise in pretending that cold water and vigorous scrubbing can actually defeat wool-based horror. The uniforms are washed as a batch, sometimes by boiling, sometimes by magic, but always returned a little stiffer, a little more haunted by last week's stains. The result is a fresh set of clothes that somehow feel even heavier with regret than before. And then there's the smell. Even the most optimistic nose can't mistake the bouquet of damp wool, sweat, and something that might once have been soup. On hot days, the air in the cell block reaches a point where you're convinced the uniforms are evolving their own weather patterns. You start to dream of clean cotton, of pyjamas, of socks that don't make you want to apologise to your feet. But for all its discomfort, the uniform is a reminder. You belong to the institution now. Your old clothes with their memories and stories are long gone, replaced by this daily armour of communal misery. Sometimes, as you scratch at a new patch of mystery rash, you can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Even your cellmate agrees. The uniform is the great equaliser, the one thing nobody can escape. And as you stand in line for roll call, cap crooked, tunic bunching at the waist, shoes threatening to stage a rebellion, you take comfort in the silent solidarity of 100 other prisoners, all united by a single, scratchy truth. In Victorian prison, fashion is pain, but at least you're all suffering together. Welcome to the culinary experience of the 1800s. Breakfast is a ladle of lukewarm gruel, served with a chunk of bread you could use to sand furniture. Cutlery is optional, so is flavour. You chew thoughtfully, pondering whether this is food or just a dare. The Victorian prison breakfast is less about starting your day, and more about seeing how much you're willing to endure for the sake of basic survival. It's early, and the dining hall, if you can call it that, buzzes with the sound of shuffling feet, the occasional cough, and 1,000 tiny sighs. You join the slow-moving queue, clutching your tin bowl, already resigned to whatever slop is on the menu. You know better than to expect variety. The only real surprise is whether today's gruel will be thicker than water or closer to a hearty, flavourless soup. The server, a fellow prisoner on kitchen duty, stands behind a vat of steaming mystery. Their expression is one of existential defeat, occasionally broken up by a furtive glance to make sure nobody's trying to smuggle out an extra crust. With a mechanical motion, they plop a scoop of gruel into your bowl. It lands with a sound best described as optimistic splat. Some days it's grey, some days it's brown, but the taste is always spectacularly neutral. If nothing else, Victorian gruel is a masterclass in setting your expectations at ground level. The bread comes next, a hunk so dense it's rumoured to have its own gravitational pull. You knock it against the table for fun, it thuds, and you half expect it to bounce. Its colour? Somewhere between beige and just gave up. Its aroma? Slightly yeasty, with hints of stale air and regret. Butter is a fantasy, and jam is a distant rumour. You can, if you're brave, soak it in your gruel to soften it up. Of course, this simply means you're eating wet disappointment, but at least it goes down easier. Seating is communal, but the mood is not. You plop down on a long bench among a sea of equally uninspired diners. Everyone is eating in silence, either out of respect for the rules or simple self-preservation. Conversation is a luxury reserved for people who have something interesting to say, and nobody here has the energy for existential musings before 7 a.m. You focus on your meal, chewing with determination and the occasional wince. There's no cutlery for most, just a battered spoon if you're lucky, or your hands if you're not. Etiquette goes out the window, and dignity soon follows. You try not to think too hard about the last time the bowls were properly scrubbed. In the world of prison cuisine, the 5-second rule is replaced by the "as long as you don't make eye contact with the dirt, it doesn't exist" rule. Occasionally a guard paces the aisle, eyeing the crowd with a look that says, "Don't even think about enjoying this." No one does. The only smuggling going on is an extra bit of crust slipped to a neighbour, in exchange for a promise to return the favour when luck reverses. You develop a fondness for routine, for the way gruel never quite manages to taste the same way twice. Some days it's watery enough to drink, other days it tries and fails to hold its shape. By the end of breakfast you feel both strangely full and deeply unsatisfied. The meal lingers, not in memory, but somewhere in your digestive system, plotting its next move. You scrape your bowl clean with the bread and try not to wonder what counts as a balanced diet in the eyes of the Victorian penal system. Whatever it is, you're certain this isn't it. As you return your bowl to the washing station, you glance around at the other inmates. There's a sort of camaraderie and shared disappointment, a group understanding that, no matter your crime, you're all in this flavourless boat together. You trade a wry smile with the guy across the table, both of you silently agreeing. Tomorrow's breakfast will be exactly the same, and somehow that's both the worst and the best thing about it. One last look at the breadcrumb battlefield, and you shuffle out, ready to face another day. In Victorian prison, breakfast isn't just a meal. It's an endurance test, a study in humility, and a daily reminder that the only thing harder than the bread is the life itself. There's nothing like being counted for the 3rd time this morning. Guards bark names. You try to stand straight while your stomach mutinies. One guy sneezes and gets a glare. Another tries to scratch his nose and gets a warning. It's all very motivational. Roll call in a Victorian prison isn't just a head count, it's a performance. You and dozens of your fellow inmates shuffle into formation in the drafty corridor, each person spaced a precisely measured distance apart, as if anyone here actually wants to get close to anyone else. The routine is so familiar, you could probably do it in your sleep, and to be honest, some people seem to try. The guards, clipboards in hand, stroll up and down the lines with an air of deep suspicion, as if half the population has spontaneously vanished since breakfast. They call out names in rapid succession, never making eye contact, always ready to pounce on hesitation. You respond with a monotone present, because anything more enthusiastic could be mistaken for rebellion. The trick is to speak just loud enough to be heard, but not so loud that you attract additional attention. The art of roll call is equal parts invisibility and survival. Occasionally a guard will linger on someone's name, pausing dramatically, like a Victorian game show host about to announce the unlucky winner. The poor soul in question stands a little straighter, suddenly convinced they've committed a crime in their sleep, like snoring too aggressively or dreaming about freedom. The guards love these moments, a chance to assert control, if only for a second, in a place where everyone is already under it. You try to stay focused, but your mind wanders. You count the cracks in the wall. You try to remember what day it is. You wonder if it's possible to die of boredom, or if you'll just become fossilized in your regulation boots. The line shuffles forward. Someone coughs, and the nearest guard's eyes narrow. You mentally place bets on who will get singled out for standing at the wrong angle. And then, of course, there's the cold. The corridor is less cozy home and more wind tunnel designed by a sadist. You shift from foot to foot trying to keep your blood circulating, which is apparently suspicious behaviour. A guard snaps at you to stand still, so you freeze, immediately wishing you hadn't. Your toes begin to lose feeling, but at least you're not the guy next to the open window, who looks like he's auditioning for a new line of icicles. As the list drones on, you become hyper-aware of your body. The growling of your stomach, breakfast never quite did the job, the itch beneath your scratchy tunic, the sudden urge to sneeze at the worst possible moment. You resist. In Victorian prison, even involuntary actions are interpreted as insubordination. The highlight of roll call, if you can call it that, is the inevitable recount. The guards' numbers never quite match up, so the process begins anew, accompanied by increasingly exasperated sighs from everyone involved. Sometimes it feels like the entire system is built on the principle of measure twice, punish anyway. If you're lucky, nobody goes missing, and the count finally matches the paperwork. If not, get ready to stand there while the guards debate basic arithmetic. There's an unspoken camaraderie in the misery. You exchange glances with your neighbours, tiny, silent acknowledgements that you're all stuck in the same absurd routine. The older prisoners roll their eyes. The newcomers try to stand at attention, not yet wise to the art of looking alert while daydreaming about bread that won't chip a tooth. When it's finally over, you file out in perfect dispirited order. The guards shout for silence, though no one was talking. You glance back at the line, slouching, shivering, united in collective exasperation. Roll call isn't just about counting bodies, it's a daily test of patience, posture, and the ability to avoid becoming the example for everyone else. You trudge on to your next task, grateful for any movement, even if it's just another line. In Victorian prison, standing in place is an art form, and you're on your way to becoming a master. You shuffle into the yard with dozens of other prisoners, all walking in perfect silence. The yard is a sea of gravel, surrounded by towering walls. The only thing breaking up the monotony is the occasional pigeon, who seems to know he has more freedom than you do. Morning exercise in Victorian prison isn't designed to get your blood pumping so much as your spirit surrendering. Forget yoga mats or energetic playlists here. Exercise means a slow, endless walk in a grey circle, shoes crunching against gravel with each step. There's no talking, no whistling, and definitely no smiling. The guards keep watch from the corners, ready to bark at anyone who dares to inject a bit of enthusiasm or, heaven forbid, creativity into the routine. If you're caught doing anything but shuffling forward, you're likely to get a stern word, a mark on your record, and a bonus lap for good measure. The yard itself is an architectural masterclass in discouragement. Towering stone walls blot out any hope of a view, broken only by the odd tuft of weeds that seem braver than most people here. There's a solitary tree in one corner, rumoured to have been planted for shade, but in reality it's just another thing you're not allowed to touch. Some days the sun dares to peek over the wall, illuminating the dust motes like a spotlight on your collective misery. Most days, though, it's just clouds, cold, and the distant promise of rain. You're required to keep a set pace, not too slow, not too fast, and always in formation, like a particularly demoralised marching band with no instruments and even less hope. If you lag, a guard with a whistle materialises at your elbow, suggesting that you pick it up, lad, as if you've simply forgotten that walking is an option. Try to walk too quickly, though, and you'll draw suspicion for being overly eager. The key to survival, perfect mediocrity. The most interesting thing about exercise time is the unspoken contest to see who can shuffle the slowest without getting yelled at. It's a delicate art. You glance at the other prisoners, some with shoulders hunched against the cold, others lost in their own private daydreams of freedom, warm socks, or a breakfast that doesn't involve industrial-strength gruel. Your mind wanders too, perhaps, to what you'd be doing outside these walls. Jogging in a park, highly unlikely. Walking the dog. You'd settle for being the dog, honestly, just for a change of scenery. Occasionally you'll notice the yard regulars, those who've been inside the longest and have perfected their shuffling technique. They move with a sort of resigned grace, eyes fixed on the ground, lips pressed into a permanent line. They know every crack in the stone, every loose bit of gravel, every spot where a brave dandelion might force its way through. To them, exercise isn't about health, it's about marking time, one step after another, until the next bell sounds. Of course, there are the pigeons, bold, swaggering, Utterly fearless, they strut around the yard as if they own the place. Sometimes they'll land right in front of your shuffling line, pecking at invisible crumbs, daring you to deviate from your path. The guards don't mind the pigeons. Some say they're there for atmosphere, but you suspect it's just another reminder that even birds are allowed to leave when they please. You envy their wings, their freedom, their utter lack of concern for Victorian discipline. Sometimes, just for a moment, you let your mind slip. You imagine what it would be like to run, really run, across grass, wind on your face, sun warming your back. But then the line halts, the whistle blows, and you're yanked back to reality. Morning exercise is over. You've completed another lap in the endless hamster wheel of prison life, and your reward is well, mostly the knowledge that you're one step closer to lunch. As you file back inside, you cast one last look at the pigeons. You wonder if they ever look at you and feel grateful for their lot in life. Probably not. But as you shuffle toward your next assignment, you remind yourself, in Victorian prison, the only thing worse than morning exercise is everything else. Silence is strictly enforced. You're not allowed to speak, hum, or even whistle. Communication is achieved through furtive glances and the universal language of sighs. If you forget and utter a single word, a guard will remind you, at great volume, that Victorian prisons are basically a library run by angry librarians. The silence system is not just a rule, but a lifestyle, one that takes monastic vows and raises them to a bureaucratic art form. The very air hums with tension, not from threats of violence, but from the ever-present danger of saying something as wild and rebellious as good morning. Here, words are more dangerous than weapons. One stray syllable, and you risk the wrath of a guard whose main job description is professional shusher. Guards patrol the halls like disappointed schoolmasters, scanning the faces of inmates for any hint of conversation. Your cellmate tries to raise an eyebrow at you, an act of extreme social risk, while you focus on perfecting the blank, distant stare that says, no thoughts, just Victorian compliance. If the guards could, they'd probably confiscate your thoughts too, just to be sure. It's not just conversation that's forbidden. Even a cough, a laugh, or a humming tune can get you in trouble. Whistling is considered downright seditious after all. What if you accidentally whistle the theme to freedom? For many, the only form of expression left is a deep, world-weary sigh. Over time, the prisoners have developed a complex sign language of sighs. There's the I'm bored sigh, the I'm cold sigh, and the rare but cherished I just got extra bread sigh. You learn to read these like a secret code, picking up the nuances of desperation and shared suffering. Meals are especially tense. You sit shoulder to shoulder with dozens of other inmates, all chewing in synchronized silence, the only soundtrack being the scrape of spoons on tin bowls and the occasional sniffle. If someone drops a spoon, the sound rings out like a gunshot. Eyes dart around, hoping the noise doesn't count as communication. Sometimes you lock eyes with another prisoner across the table and, for a fleeting second, feel a connection deeper than words. Then you both remember the rules and stare back at your gruel. The silent system extends everywhere. The workrooms, the corridors, even the exercise yard. Prisoners march in rigid formation, shuffling along, eyes locked on the ground. A sneeze can earn you a warning, and God help you if you trip and mutter an apology. The guards have a sixth sense for whispered rebellion, and they're always eager to remind you that this isn't a place for camaraderie or comfort. At first, the silence feels oppressive, almost surreal. Your mind fills the void with imagined conversations, jokes, and memories of voices from the outside world. You replay arguments, rehearse apologies, and sometimes, just for variety, invent snappy comebacks you wish you delivered during your trial. But as days pass, the silence seeps in. Your inner monologue becomes quieter, your thoughts slower, your sense of self slowly flattening into the same blank routine as everyone else. Still, the human spirit is nothing if not inventive. Some prisoners develop elaborate systems of eye blinks, toe taps, or secret hand signals. A well-timed cough from cell block D might mean watch out, the guard is coming. A shoe scrape under the table becomes a Morse code message. Even the guards, in their endless quest to prevent joy, can't quite stamp out every act of subversive communication. In time, you learn to savour the few moments when silence is actually a gift. A quiet cell, a break from the endless barking of orders, a rare second to be alone with your thoughts. But most of the time, it's just a wall, the invisible barrier that keeps you from reaching out to anyone else, reminding you that, in Victorian prison, the loudest thing of all is the silence. And when you're finally released back into the noisy world, you'll flinch the first time someone asks, "How was your day?" Because in here, the answer has always been the same: silent, long, and just one sigh after another. The prison chapel is your weekly escape from the routine, a place to reflect, repent, or, if you're clever, just enjoy a few moments sitting down indoors. The chaplain offers spiritual comfort, or at least some variety in the day. You silently pray for freedom, or at least better bread. Stepping into the chapel is like passing through a portal. The echoing clang of the corridors is replaced by the quiet murmur of old hymnals and the thick, musty scent of stone warmed by candlelight. Wooden pews stretch out in stiff formation, creaking with the weight of too many desperate hopes. You take your seat, grateful for the simple luxury of a backrest. Compared to your cell, the chapel feels almost decadent. Here, at least, you're allowed to sit without a guard barking at you to stand up, march, or look lively. Here, the only demand is to be penitent or at least look like you're trying. Around you, inmates settle in, shoulders loosening just a touch. The weekly visit is a break from the usual parade of gruel, gravel, and gruff orders. For some, it's a sacred hour to whisper regrets and seek forgiveness. For others, it's the only time all week you get to hear music, played by someone who isn't also plotting to sell you their boots. The sunlight filters in through coloured glass, casting a few hopeful beams across the pews. You watch the dust dance in the light and wonder if somewhere in the cosmos someone is actually listening. The chaplain stands at the pulpit, part preacher, part therapist, part overworked schoolteacher. He clears his throat, launching into a sermon that, if you're lucky, is short and blessedly free of any personal anecdotes about temptation and shoe polish. He reminds you of your sins, which, depending on the week, may include everything from grand larceny to pilfering an extra turnip. If he's in a forgiving mood, the message is hopeful. If not, you're in for 40 minutes of stern warnings about the perils of idleness and the eternal consequences of rolling your eyes at authority. Some prisoners bow their heads in genuine devotion, lips moving in silent prayer. Others sneak glances at the windows, counting pigeons or planning, with surgical precision, how many minutes remain before lunch. One fellow to your left seems to be inventing a new form of yoga, equal parts meditation, equal parts strategic napping. You join him, but the bench is too hard, and the fear of snoring in front of 100 witnesses is very real. The hymns are the highlight, if only because they're the closest thing you get to group therapy. Voices rise, hesitant at first, then swelling with a strange communal power. For a few minutes you're part of something bigger, a chorus of lost, stubbornly hopeful souls. You may not remember all the words, but you know the tune, and in this place, that's enough. The guards hover at the edges, pretending not to listen, but you catch one tapping his toe to the melody before he remembers himself. When it's time for confession, the line is long. Some pour out their guilt in a torrent, others keep it short and vague. Bless me, Father, for I have survived another week. The chaplain listens, offers advice, doles out penance, sometimes a prayer, sometimes a suggestion to apologise to the kitchen staff. A few use the opportunity to complain about the bread. The chaplain has heard it all and, rumour has it, once confessed to the bishop that he's run out of creative ways to say try harder next time. The service ends with a benediction and a quick check to make sure no one's stolen the candles. You rise, joints protesting, and shuffle back toward the grey corridors. The chapel's peace fades with every step, replaced once again by the routine, roll call, hard labour, more bread that's better at removing plaque than nourishing the soul. But for a moment at least, you were somewhere else. You glimpsed a sliver of hope, or forgiveness, or maybe just a brief escape. And as you head back to your cell, you can't help but think, in Victorian prison, you take your miracles wherever you can get them, even if they come with splinters, off-key hymns, and the faint but persistent smell of burning tallow. This is it, the part everyone dreads. You're handed a hammer and pointed toward a pile of rocks that might outnumber your regrets. Your job? Smash them into smaller rocks. Why? Don't ask, just keep swinging and try not to think about your lower back. Hard labour in a Victorian prison is not a punishment designed by the creatively cruel. It's punishment invented by someone who thought endless, pointless, and exhausting was the gold standard for rehabilitation. You join the parade of prisoners, each shuffling toward their designated heap of misery. There's a brief moment of hope that you'll be assigned the light work, perhaps sorting pebbles, or if you're lucky, stacking firewood. But no, today is a break rocks until the whistle blows kind of day. The only thing more relentless than the labour is the suspicious way the pile never seems to shrink. The tools are basic: one iron hammer, possibly older than the prison itself, and gloves that might once have been sturdy but are now mostly holes held together by stubbornness and wishful thinking. You grip the handle, the weight both comforting and menacing, and wonder if your hands will ever be clean again. Spoiler, they won't. The work is as repetitive as it is unrewarding. You raise the hammer, bring it down, and are met with a satisfying thunk, or, more often, a jarring vibration that travels from your palm to your teeth. The rock splits or doesn't. Sometimes the rock seems specifically engineered to resist. You find yourself imagining that each boulder represents something from your old life. Missed opportunities, bad haircuts, every slice of bread you ever ate in here. It helps to give the labour some personal meaning, though mostly it just distracts you from the way your back is beginning to protest, loudly and with increasing confidence. Conversation is, of course, forbidden. Any attempt at small talk results in a guard materialising like an angry genie, whistle at the ready. So communication takes the form of eye rolls, dramatic sighs, and the occasional sympathetic nod when someone drops their hammer for the third time in an hour. You develop a camaraderie with your fellow sufferers, bonded not by words, but by the mutual understanding that, yes, this is just as pointless as it feels. As the hours drag on, your arms begin to ache. Muscles you didn't know you had join in the chorus of complaints. The sun crawls overhead on the lucky days, or the drizzle soaks your shoulders on the normal days. Either way, the rocks remain unmoved. You'd swear they're multiplying when your back is turned. You break one, two more appear. It's a geological version of a practical joke. Occasionally a guard wanders by to offer encouragement, which in prison speak means reminding you that there are always more rocks, and always less patience for anyone who slows down. Some days, a supervisor inspects your progress, frowning at your pile of crushed stone with the air of a disappointed art critic. "Bit small, isn't it?" he'll say, as if you've failed to understand the deep artistic meaning of reducing things to rubble. Lunch is a brief respite. You sit on your favourite boulder, yes, you have favourites now, chewing on bread that tastes even drier in the open air. Your hands are a tapestry of blisters and grit. You flex your fingers and wonder if you'll ever fully unclench them. Spoiler, you won't. By the end of the shift, you're running on stubbornness alone. The pile is marginally smaller, your spirit only slightly more so. The final whistle blows, sweet and shrill, and you drop the hammer like a badge of honour. As you shuffle back to the cells, you pass a new delivery of fresh rocks. Of course, the work is never really done. Still, there's a strange pride in surviving another day of pointless punishment. In the grand scheme of things, you've contributed nothing to society but a slightly increased supply of small stones. But you did it. Your back aches, your hands throb, and your regrets are, for a moment, drowned out by the satisfying silence of the end of hard labour. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because in Victorian prison, rocks and misery are the only things in endless supply. If rock breaking isn't your fate, perhaps you're picking oakum, unravelling old ropes into fibres for hours on end. It's repetitive, finger-shredding, and so mind-numbing you begin to suspect this is what purgatory feels like. You will never look at a rope the same way again. Oakum picking, the Victorian penal system's answer to the age-old question, how can we make time pass more slowly and painfully? Your workstation is a long wooden bench, a pile of frayed old rope that smells like it's been at the bottom of the Thames since the last plague, and a bucket to catch the fluffy detritus of your labour. The task is simple, in theory. Take the tar-stained rope, tease it apart into fine threads, repeat until your will to live is as thin as the fibres in your bucket. You begin the day with some hope, or at least some optimism that maybe today the ropes will be softer, less crusted with ancient tar and mystery grit. They never are. Your fingers, already nicked and raw, protest as you pull apart each stubborn strand. The rope resists in ways that seem personal. It frays into a splintery mess, each thread clinging to its neighbours like old secrets. Within minutes, your hands are sticky, your nails packed with grime, and the scent of tar has settled into your skin for the foreseeable future. Conversation is, as always, strictly forbidden. The only sounds are the squeak of the bench, the rasp of rope, and the occasional muttered oath when someone hits a particularly uncooperative knot. You communicate with your fellow pickers through elaborate eyebrow raises and the silent competition to see who can pile up the most oakum before the overseer strolls by. The overseer's main job appears to be wandering up and down the row, offering motivational gems like "let's see some hustle," and the Navy needs that oakum, as if any of you are personally invested in ship maintenance. You wonder about the fate of the oakum you're creating. Rumour has it, it's sent to shipyards to plug the gaps between planks, keeping water out and sailors in. You picture a proud ship's captain, oblivious to the fact that the stuff keeping his vessel afloat was picked apart by a parade of prisoners, desperate for a change of scenery and a band-aid. There's a certain irony in it. Ships stay seaworthy, and your hands slowly dissolve. You lose track of time quickly. The work is so monotonous that minutes blend into hours, hours into what might as well be geological eras. Your mind wanders. You recall every rope you've ever seen, every knot you ever tied, every time you wished for a simpler life. If only you'd known that the simpler life involved tearing apart old ropes for a living, maybe you would have chosen a more exciting crime. The physical toll is relentless. Tar gets everywhere, under your nails, in your hair, smeared across your forehead when you rub your brow without thinking. The tiny splinters burrow into your skin, reminders of the rope's stubbornness. Some prisoners wrap their fingers in rags for protection, but the overseers don't like it. "No slacking," they bark, as if pain is part of the learning process. Occasionally you're lucky enough to find a section of rope that unravels easily, almost willingly, as if even the rope is tired of this existence. You savour these moments, each one a small private victory in a day otherwise ruled by repetition and discomfort. You begin to develop opinions on rope, strong ones. Good rope, bad rope, rope that's seen better centuries. The subject dominates your internal monologue. When the end of shift bell finally rings, your hands are aching, your lap is full of tarry fluff, and your brain feels oddly lighter, probably because you've left a little sanity behind in every strand. You stumble away from the bench, vowing never to touch another rope as long as you live. Spoiler, you will tomorrow. Because in Victorian prison, punishment is always waiting at the end of your rope, and you're the one left to unravel it. One painful, splintery strand at a time. Today you're assigned laundry duty, which means boiling clothes, inhaling enough steam to open your pores permanently, and scrubbing stains you'd rather not identify. Bonus: the water's always cold and there's never enough soap. Laundry day in a Victorian prison isn't a break from the routine, it's just a different flavour of misery. You enter the laundry room, a stone chamber where the humidity instantly makes your wool uniform feel like a portable sauna. The windows are permanently fogged, and the air is thick with the mingled scent of wet wool, lye, and something you can only hope is last week's soup. The process is as follows: strip the beds, gather up armfuls of filthy tunics and sour-smelling socks, and sort them into slightly disgusting and actively hazardous. If you ever wondered what the bottom layer of a week-old straw mattress feels like, congratulations, today's your chance. You wrangle the sheets, dodging mysterious stains, rogue straw, and the occasional live insect. The laundry pile threatens to topple, but you soldier on, comforted by the knowledge that at least you're not outside breaking rocks. Small victories. Step 1 is the boil. At one end of the room, an enormous cauldron simmers atop a coal fire, belching out waves of steam that could poach an egg from across the room. You feed it with an armful of shirts, a scoop of homemade soap, more sand than suds, and a generous helping of elbow grease. The soap, when you can get it, is a rough grey slab that smells faintly medicinal and mostly like disappointment. You learn to ration it like gold, rubbing it between your hands and watching in vain for the miracle of bubbles. Once the clothes are boiling, you're handed a long stick, your sceptre of suffering, to prod the linens, ensuring every inch is thoroughly scalded. This is less spa treatment and more witch's brew for unwanted garments. Steam rolls over your face, opening pores you didn't know you had, making you feel like you're about to be served for dinner instead of the other way around. You wipe your brow and add accidental facial to the growing list of indignities. Next comes scrubbing. You haul the steaming, dripping clothes to a row of wooden washboards, each as warped as your faith in personal hygiene. The stains range from ordinary dirt to spots you refuse to speculate about. You scrub with a bristly brush until your arms ache, sweat pouring down your temples, the grime beneath your nails stubbornly resisting all efforts at removal. If the guards are in a generous mood, they might provide a second brush. More likely you improvise, alternating hands and teeth-gritted determination. The rinse is a cruel joke, buckets of ice-cold water, guaranteed to shock your skin back to reality. You dunk and wring out each item, shivering and splashing. The laundry room's floor quickly becomes a swamp, and you lose track of how many socks you've wrung out by the time your fingers go numb. Some prisoners get creative, tying up their sleeves or pants with string, hoping to escape with matching pairs. Most just accept that laundry day is the universe's way of making sure you'll never feel truly dry again. The final step is hanging everything up to dry, outside if you're lucky, inside if the weather's truly bleak. Rows of limp, colourless clothes sway in the chilly breeze, looking for all the world like ghosts of prisoners past. You step back, admire your handiwork, and pray the wind doesn't blow away the one halfway decent shirt in the batch. By the end of your shift, you're soaked, sore, and carrying the unmistakable scent of clean enough. The room is quieter, the steam slowly dissipating. You've earned your place among the ranks of the scrubbing elite, a badge of honour measured in blisters and slightly whiter socks. And as you trudge back to your cell, you remind yourself, in Victorian prison, cleanliness isn't next to godliness. It's just the next line on the ever-growing list of small, strange victories that keep you going. Lunch rolls around, which is generous, because nothing here actually rolls. It's another bowl of soup, a wedge of bread, and maybe, if you're lucky, something vaguely resembling meat. You eat quickly, because you've learned not to ask questions. The midday meal in a Victorian prison is a ritual that requires both strategy and lowered expectations. You line up with your tin bowl, shuffling forward beneath the steely gaze of a kitchen trustee, whose main job seems to be protecting the food from optimism. A heavy ladle clunks into the cauldron, dredging up a liquid so thin it could pass for broth, if you squint, believe, and suspend your disbelief. Every day you try to guess the soup's ingredients. Some say it's potato, others swear by cabbage. Most agree it's vegetable only in the sense that hot water once touched a turnip. You reach the serving table, and the trustee offers you your ration with the enthusiasm of a mortician. The soup lands in your bowl with a faint splash, and a stronger warning not to spill any. There are consequences for wasting food here, even if the food in question is more suggestion than substance. Alongside your soup, you're handed a wedge of bread that looks suspiciously familiar. It could be from yesterday or the day before, or perhaps it's been reincarnated for centuries. The crust is tough, the interior crumbly, and you know better than to question what might be hiding inside. You bang it against the table once just to assert dominance, before dipping it in the soup for damage control. Sometimes the kitchen surprises you with meat, a piece so small you might mistake it for a particularly ambitious crouton. Is it beef? Pork? Rat? You've learned it's best not to investigate. You simply close your eyes, chew quickly, and move on. Once, a fellow inmate claimed he tasted actual flavour. He's been regarded with suspicion ever since. You sit down at the communal tables, surrounded by the low buzz of grumbling bellies and the silent choreography of desperate dunking. Nobody speaks unless absolutely necessary. Talking during meals is discouraged, both by the guards and by the food itself, which requires your full concentration just to keep down. Conversation, when it does happen, revolves around memories of real meals: roast chicken, a steaming pie, the soft glory of buttered toast. These tales are passed around like sacred relics, evidence of a life before this one, and for a moment, you can almost smell the kitchen at home. Meal etiquette is simple. Eat quickly, don't complain, out loud, and always finish everything in your bowl, even if it means a little creative thinking. You learn to savour the illusion of fullness, how the hot liquid fills your stomach and warms you just enough to make the afternoon bearable. The bread, once soaked in soup, becomes marginally easier to swallow. A true gourmet would call it rustic. You call it not choking. On some days, the kitchen staff gets creative, tossing in an onion skin, a scrap of carrot, or the ghost of a pea. When this happens, it's cause for celebration. Whispers of green in the soup travel down the table with electric excitement. Prisoners trade bits of bread, soup, and the occasional smuggled crumb in a barter system that would make Wall Street jealous. Once the meal is over, you return your bowl to a steaming tub at the end of the hall, where it's washed in water that is probably colder than the soup was hot. You pat your stomach, stretch your back, and steel yourself for the afternoon. Hunger is never quite gone. It just sits quietly, waiting for its next turn. In Victorian prison, lunch is neither feast nor famine. It's a shared experience of humility, acceptance, and the kind of ingenuity that comes from necessity. And as you shuffle back to work, you remind yourself, whatever was in that soup, at least it's over, until tomorrow. Every prison has its cast of characters, and the jailer is one of them. Sometimes stern, sometimes suspiciously cheerful, always holding the keys just out of reach. You wonder if he was born with that glare or if it's just a side effect of the job. The jailer, pronounced jailer if you ever dare to ask, which you won't, is equal parts warden, referee and audience to your daily misery. He's the keeper of the routines and the orchestrator of all things inconvenient. Some say he's been here since the prison was built, part man, part stone, and all authority. You first met him on arrival, when he sized you up with a look that said, "You're not the first and you won't be the last." His uniform is as sharp as his eyes, crisp tunic, polished boots, keys jangling from his belt like metallic punctuation marks. He always walks with purpose, whether he's unlocking a door or simply inspecting the floor for offences you didn't know existed. The keys are a constant companion, swaying with every step, glinting in the low light, a reminder that freedom is always close, just not for you. His glare is legendary. It's the sort of look that could curdle milk, silence a room, or make you forget your own name. It's equal parts boredom and suspicion, like he's permanently disappointed in both you and the world at large. Sometimes you catch him staring through you as if he's mentally cataloguing which rule you're about to break next. Other times, there's a twinkle of amusement, fleeting, but real, like he's secretly tallying which inmate will provide the most entertainment today. Interactions with the jailer are a delicate dance. Too polite, and he suspects you're scheming. Too casual, and he suspects you're up to something worse. He has a sixth sense for contraband, late-night whispers, and anyone trying to squirrel away an extra slice of bread. He appears around corners with uncanny timing, always just as someone is about to make a questionable decision. You develop a kind of radar for his presence, a sixth sense that tells you to straighten up, look busy, and definitely not giggle. But for all his authority, the jailer is also a civil servant, which means even he can't escape the mind-numbing boredom of routine. Some days you catch him yawning during roll call, tapping his foot through chapel service, or sneaking a sip from a battered mug labelled Best Jailer by default. On a rare occasion, if you listen closely, you'll hear him mutter under his breath about paperwork, the cold or the endless parade of identical uniforms. There are rumours, naturally. Some inmates say he's a former soldier, others swear he was a poet before life in the jail wore him down. Once, you heard a story that he tried to start a chess club for inmates, but disbanded it after realising everyone used the pieces to smuggle messages. In the grand theatre of prison life, the jailer is the stage manager, invisible when things run smoothly, unavoidable when the script goes off the rails. Once in a while, he surprises you. He might smuggle a book to a prisoner who's earned it, or quietly look the other way when someone needs an extra minute outside. These flashes of humanity are rare, but enough to keep you guessing. Is he friend, foe, or just another person trying to survive the system? The answer changes daily. At the end of the day, the keys still jingle, the doors still shut, and the jailer does his rounds, keeping everything ticking with clockwork precision. You nod in his direction as you file back to your cell, wondering what he dreams about when the doors are finally locked and silence settles in. Maybe, just maybe, he dreams of keys, freedom, and a world where nobody ever tries to bribe him with bread again. But tomorrow he'll be back, glare in place, keys at the ready, forever holding your fate just out of reach. For those who break the rules, there's the separate system, solitary confinement in a tiny cell with nothing but your own thoughts and a bucket. Time slows to a crawl, and you suddenly realise that even the company of your loudest cellmate wasn't so bad. The solitary cell is a marvel of architectural pessimism. If your normal prison cell felt like a shoebox, solitary feels more like the box the shoebox came in. The door swings shut with a finality you feel in your bones. The air is thick, unmoving and heavy with the scent of cold stone, old water, and the faint lingering presence of everyone who's paced this floor before you. The bucket sits in the corner, your one companion, and the closest thing you have to a social life now. Gone is the background hum of the prison, the coughs, the clatter of tin bowls, the endless drone of the jailer's keys. In solitary you get silence, unfiltered and absolute. At first it's a relief. You stretch out, appreciating that you finally have room for all your limbs and no one is trying to borrow your blanket or confess their crimes at 2 a.m. but then the novelty wears off, and what's left is you. 4 walls, and the realization that your own thoughts are louder than any cellmate ever was. You find yourself developing a new routine, a kind of minimalist schedule. First, you pace the room, counting your steps. You make it from wall to wall in precisely 3 strides, if you walk heel to toe like a circus tightrope artist. Next, you examine the graffiti etched into the stone. Some of it is centuries old, tiny marks made by the desperate and the bored. You run your fingers along the grooves, trying to decipher the messages. Cryptic initials, crude stick figures, tally marks that go on and on. You add your own mark, partly for posterity, partly so you don't forget what your handwriting looks like. Mealtime is the highlight, if only for the change of pace. A slot in the door rattles open and a hand shoves through a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, and sometimes a sliver of cheese, if the kitchen staff is feeling revolutionary. You eat slowly, savouring each bite as if it's your last, even though you know it will taste exactly the same tomorrow. Sometimes you save a crust of bread for later, just to have something to look forward to. The hours stretch on. There are no clocks, just the slow shift of light on the wall, and the gradual cooling of the air as day becomes night. You talk to yourself, at first as a joke, then as a necessity. You recount old memories, rehearse conversations you wish you'd had, invent new ones just for entertainment. The bucket, ever silent, is a patient listener. With nothing but your thoughts for company, you start to notice things you never paid attention to before, the faint dripping sound from somewhere outside, the distant echo of footsteps, the pattern of cracks in the ceiling that look a bit like a map of the world. You find yourself making up stories about each one, anything to keep your mind busy and the silence at bay. Sleep comes in fits and starts. The absence of noise is both blessing and curse. You dream vividly. Sometimes you're free, sometimes you're at roll call, sometimes you're arguing with the bucket over whose turn it is to take a nap. You wake up unsure if it's day or night, and for a moment you wonder if you'll ever want company again. Eventually the door creaks open. Light floods the cell. Solitary has done its job. You're more than ready for the chaos of the main prison block. Even the jailer's glare is a welcome sight. As you step out, you give your old cell one last look, a box full of silence, lessons, and a very patient bucket. And you promise yourself, next time someone asks if you'd rather be alone, you'll think twice before answering. On visiting day, you're lined up in hopes of seeing a familiar face, or at least receiving a letter from home. Sometimes you get a brief smile through a barred window. Other times, nothing comes at all, and hope has to wait another week. Visiting day is the closest thing to a holiday in Victorian prison, and it arrives with a strange mix of excitement and dread. The routine is always the same. Stand in line with the other prisoners, hair combed, uniform straightened, face scrubbed as best you can with whatever water was left after laundry duty. For a moment, you almost feel human again, until you remember you're about to see your loved ones through thick glass, surrounded by guards who look at every emotion like it's a threat to security. You're marched to the visitors' area in single file, the echo of your boots bouncing off the walls in a rhythm that almost sounds like a parade, if parades were held for the deeply disappointed. You scan the waiting area, hoping to spot a familiar hat or shawl, straining to catch sight of someone you miss more than warm socks or real butter. Some prisoners shift from foot to foot, rehearsing what they'll say if their mother, wife, or wayward cousin actually shows up. Others keep their faces blank, already bracing for the disappointment that so often comes. Sometimes you're lucky. A parent arrives, pale and anxious but smiling bravely. A spouse brings news from the outside, a new job, the price of potatoes, a neighbour's scandal that briefly makes you feel connected to the world beyond these walls. The conversation is awkward at first, both sides tripping over too many unsaid things, but soon it slips into the familiar rhythm of everyday life. You joke about the food, ask after the children, promise that next time you'll have more cheerful stories to share. The minutes tick by far too quickly, each one a treasure. When the bell rings, signalling the end of visiting time, you cling to the memory of their smile, the glint of sunlight on their hair, the sound of your name spoken with love. Other days, the seat on the other side of the glass stays empty. You stare at your hands, waiting for a miracle. You tell yourself there's a good reason: illness, bad weather, a missed carriage. But disappointment clings like cold fog. Around you, other prisoners murmur comfort, trade stories of missed visits, and pass around a scrap of contraband to lift a friend's spirits. Some hold out hope for a letter, a thin envelope passed from the jailer's hand to yours, marked with a familiar scrawl or, if you're lucky, a pressed flower tucked inside. Receiving a letter is its own ceremony. You trace the handwriting, breathe in the faint scent of them home, and read each line slowly, savouring every word. Sometimes it's good news, a child's drawing, a neighbour's joke, a cousin's recipe for pie you can practically taste. Sometimes it's just a list of chores left undone, or reminders to keep your chin up. Either way, you read it again and again, committing every word to memory, folding the paper until it's soft as cloth. You hide it in your mattress next to the one from last month and the one before that. But not every week brings news. Some prisoners go months, years, without a visit or a letter. They learn to tuck hope away, to keep it hidden and safe, so it doesn't break apart every time the mailbag comes up empty. On the worst days, hope is rationed like soap or sugar, eked out in tiny measures. When visiting day is over, you walk back to your cell with a little more weight or a little more lightness depending on how things went. But even when there's no letter, no visitor, you find solace in the hope that next week might be different. In Victorian prison, hope may arrive in fits and starts, but it's the one thing the jailer can't confiscate, and the only thing that makes the waiting bearable. Feeling sick? The prison infirmary offers top-notch Victorian medical care. A cot, some willow bark, and a nurse with the bedside manner of a disappointed aunt. Whatever your ailment, the treatment is usually rest, regret, and, if you're lucky, a cold compress. Stepping into the infirmary, you're greeted by an aroma best described as aged bandage meets wet floor. The air hums with a faint herbal scent, which is supposed to be medicinal, but mostly just makes you wonder what's been brewing behind the curtain. Cots line the walls, lumpy, squeaky, and spaced just far enough apart to prevent conspiracy, but not far enough to avoid overhearing your neighbour's symphony of coughs. The nurse, universally feared and respected, floats from bed to bed like a warden in white. She knows every trick in the patient's playbook, faking, malingering, attempting to exaggerate symptoms for a little time away from hard labour. Her hands are brisk, her tone is clipped, and she can take a temperature with nothing but a glare. If you try to embellish your misery, she'll give you a look that could sterilise a wound. You soon learn honesty is the best policy, at least if you want your cold compress to actually be cold. There's a routine to treatment, and it rarely deviates. Describe your symptoms, get handed a chipped mug of bitter willow bark tea, guaranteed to fix headaches, heartbreak, and possibly warts, and then settle in for an eternity of enforced rest. If you're really lucky, or unlucky, you'll be treated to a dab of salve, which smells like regret and feels about as effective as thinking positive thoughts. For serious cases, there's always a poultice, made from bread or cabbage leaves or, if you're truly unfortunate, whatever the kitchen is getting rid of that day. Doctor visits are rare, and when they happen, the doctor arrives looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. He gives your pulse a quick check, frowns at your tongue, and asks if you're still breathing. If yes, you're sent back to your cot with instructions to rest and try not to die. If not, you're shuffled to the quiet end of the ward, where the curtains are drawn and the nurse starts reciting her favourite elegy. The real miracle of the infirmary is the camaraderie among patients. Nothing forges friendship like a shared bout of Victorian flu. You swap horror stories about last week's questionable sausage, the mysterious rash from oakum picking, or the time someone tried to escape by sneezing themselves into a stupor. Laughter is the best medicine, though it's always followed by a cautionary cough. Privacy is a foreign concept. Coughs, sneezes, and complaints all mingle in the stale air. Someone always claims they're on death's door, and there's fierce competition for who can describe their symptoms most dramatically. "My fever is higher than the chapel steeple," one groans, to which another retorts, "At least your feet aren't growing roots." It's almost a sport. Of course, the biggest draw of the infirmary is the chance to escape labour, even if it means putting up with watery gruel and a nurse who believes rest is best enforced by waking you every hour to check your forehead. Still, for a day or two, you're free from rock breaking, oakum picking, and bread with the density of masonry. When you're finally declared fit, which means able to stand, you're sent back into the world with a pat on the shoulder and a vague admonition to take care. Your cough will linger, your joints will ache, but you leave with a new appreciation for your own immune system and for nurses everywhere who can cure most things with a cold stare and a colder compress. In the end, the Victorian prison infirmary is a place of small mercies, bad tea, and lower expectations. You enter sick, you leave slightly less sick, and grateful you survived Victorian medicine's greatest hits. And next time you feel a tickle in your throat, you'll do your best to hide it until you're absolutely sure you can't shake it off with positive thinking and a very large nap. As night falls, the warder makes his rounds with a lantern, peering into cells like a sleep-deprived owl. Every creak in the darkness makes you jump. There's no such thing as a restful night, not with keys jingling and footsteps echoing down stone corridors. The sun's last glow barely fades before the night shift takes over, ushering in an atmosphere that's equal parts spooky and unsettling. The day's din gives way to the kind of silence that amplifies every cough, snore and muffled whisper. And into this hush prowls the night warder, a man who seems built for darkness, with a face lit from below by lantern glow and an uncanny ability to appear just as you're drifting off. The night warder is a specialist in the fine art of insomnia. His footsteps echo with practiced authority, each one a reminder that sleep in a Victorian prison is a temporary fragile arrangement. His lantern casts shadows that dance across the walls, morphing the bars of your cell into strange writhing shapes. Sometimes you swear the warder pauses a moment too long outside your door, peering in with an intensity that makes you immediately regret ever breaking the rules, or even thinking about it. Every hour or so, the warder makes his circuit, pausing, unlocking a hatch, shining a lantern into your cell, and giving you the sort of look that says, "I know you're awake, and I don't approve." He carries an enormous ring of keys, each one clanking like an out-of-tune bell. It's said that the noise is deliberate, a gentle reminder to the inmates that he alone holds the power to open or shut every door, real or metaphorical. You try to sleep through it, of course. You wrap yourself in your threadbare blanket, close your eyes, and will yourself into dreamland. But your mind has other plans. It catalogues every sound. Was that a rat? The clink of chains? Someone sobbing 3 cells down? Is the warder about to open your door? Or is he just practicing his "I'm watching you walk"? On colder nights, the warder's rounds are punctuated by gusts of wind that sneak through the cracks, carrying with them the distinct aroma of damp stone and yesterday's despair. The temperature drops, the lantern's flame flickers, and you find yourself listening for the precise rhythm of the warder's steps, counting how many seconds you have before he turns the corner and your cell is momentarily illuminated. The night warder isn't just a warden of bodies, he's a shepherd of restless minds. Some prisoners try to outwit him by pretending to sleep, but the warder is not easily fooled. He has the uncanny skill of knowing exactly when to rattle the bars, or shine his lantern directly into your eyes, just as you're about to slip into a pleasant dream of buttered bread or soft mattresses. Occasionally, if you're lucky, the warder has a softer side. You might catch him humming a lullaby under his breath, or gently covering up a prisoner who's shivering on the coldest nights. These moments are rare, but they remind you that even in the darkest places, humanity sometimes peeks through, if only for a second before the keys start jangling again. For most, though, the night is a battleground of nerves. The hours drag by. Sleep comes in short, startled bursts, interrupted by the steady rhythm of patrols, the metallic symphony of keys, and the warder's owl-like stare. You learn to nap with one eye open, half listening for the sounds that signal either safety or sudden inspection. And as the sky finally pales with the first light of morning, the night warder's rounds come to an end. He disappears into the gloom, lantern bobbing, keys jingling like a fading threat. You emerge from another sleepless night, groggy but victorious. Because in Victorian prison, if you manage even a single good dream, you count yourself luckier than most, and you definitely keep it a secret from the warder. Step out of line, and you could earn a trip to the punishment block. Bread and water diets, extra labour or the dreaded crank, a machine that exists solely to turn muscle into misery. You begin to develop a profound respect for following the rules, at least in public. Victorian prisons were less rehabilitation centre and more. Let's see how many ways we can make you regret that one sarcastic comment. The menu of punishments was as creative as it was bleak. There were the classics: less food, more work, time in a cold stone cell with only your thoughts and a bucket. But the real masterpieces of misery came from punishments designed to be both mind-numbing and body-breaking. The bread and water diet sounds quaint until you experience it. One day you're grumbling about the usual mystery soup for lunch, and the next, you're handed a slab of bread so dense it could serve as building material, along with a cup of water that's almost, but not quite, cold. No extras, no seconds. Just enough to keep you alive, but never enough to make you feel human. You eat your ration in silence, chewing each bite so slowly you start to understand how a worm feels working through soil. Then there's the crank. On paper, it sounds like a fitness device, a big iron handle attached to a box full of gravel. Your job, turn the handle, that's it. No deeper purpose, no productive outcome. You're not grinding grain, you're not powering machinery, you're just rotating a lever while the guards watch, making sure you keep pace. Some cranks could be adjusted for resistance, which meant if the jailer was feeling generous, he never was, he could make it easier. Usually, though, it was set to heroic effort required. Hours spent at the crank left your arms aching, your back screaming, and your soul quietly contemplating a life of good behaviour. Another favourite is shot drill. Picture it, a neat line of prisoners lifting heavy iron cannonballs, carrying them to the other end of the yard, setting them down and then starting over. The balls don't need to go anywhere, and neither do you. The only thing that moves is your sense of dignity, which packs up and leaves after the first hour. The whole exercise is designed to be physically exhausting and mentally pointless. Punishment as performance art. Extra labour as a classic, and there's never any shortage of it. Break more rocks, pick more oakum, scrub more laundry, whatever needs doing, and especially the things nobody wants to do. Guards will sometimes invent chores on the spot. Sweep that yard again, now again. Oh, you missed a bit. Start over. You soon realise that the real punishment is knowing the job will never ever be finished. And then, of course, there's solitary. After a few days alone with your regrets and a bucket, you start to look back fondly on communal suffering. The silence, once a novelty, becomes its own form of torture, making you yearn for the sound of snoring cellmates and the jailer's key ring in the night. Occasionally, punishments border on the theatrical. Some unlucky souls get the plank bed treatment, sleeping on a wooden board with nothing but a wish for a pillow. Others might be sentenced to wear a hideous mask or cap to parade their shame, a kind of early reality show humiliation with no audience but your fellow inmates, and a very smug warder. What you learn from all this is simple. Victorian prisons were masters at turning everyday life into a test of endurance, creativity, and regret. The rules might seem arbitrary, but after a trip to the punishment block you start to follow them a lot more closely, at least where anyone can see you. And in a world where even breathing too loudly can earn you a date with the crank, you decide that, for now, blending in is the wisest choice you'll ever make. Bathing happens once a week, whether you need it or not. The water is cold, the soap is stingy, and you have about 5 minutes to get clean before the next person barges in. Privacy is as rare as a good hair day. In Victorian prison, hygiene is less about cleanliness and more about ritual humiliation with a splash of hypothermia. Bath day arrives with the usual sense of foreboding. You're herded into the bathing room, an echoey chamber lined with battered tin tubs and more mildew than tiles. The smell is an odd cocktail of old soap, damp stone and hope, long since expired. You queue up in a drafty corridor, towel draped over your arm like a badge of optimism. The line moves slowly, each person returning from their bath looking somewhere between traumatised and slightly less grey than before. By the time it's your turn, the air is thick with steam, complaints, and a low muttering about whose turn it is to go first next week. Everyone claims it isn't theirs. The tub itself is a masterpiece of utilitarian suffering, narrow, dented, and only marginally deeper than a puddle. The water has 2 temperatures, Arctic and leftover from the last guy. Sometimes you think you see something floating in it, but you look away quickly and hope for the best. The soap when issued is a sliver smaller than a playing card and twice as slippery. You stare at it, wondering how you're supposed to wash your entire body with a chunk of soap that could get lost in your ear. You undress as quickly as modesty and frostbite allows, toss your clothes on a peg and lower yourself into the tub. The water bites instantly. Goosebumps appear on parts of you that haven't felt emotion in weeks. You scrub as efficiently as possible, which is not very. The soap lathers only if you apologise to it first and wish upon a star. You focus on the essentials: face, hands, armpits, and anything that's made direct contact with the prison's communal bedding. Anything else is an extravagance. Meanwhile, privacy is a concept you left at the prison gates. The door swings open at regular intervals as a guard checks your progress, a fellow inmate shouts that your time is up, and the guy after you stands in the corner, arms crossed, judging your technique. If you try to dawdle, the guard reminds you loudly that cleanliness is next to godliness, but only for those who hurry up. For hair, there's communal combs, ancient, wooden, and so splintery they're basically exfoliating devices. If you're lucky, the lice are having a day off. You splash your face with cold water, take a deep breath, and attempt to convince yourself that you're now clean. Sometimes, you catch a glimpse of yourself in a cloudy mirror and wonder if this is the best you'll ever look again. After your 5 minutes of aquatic misery, you leap out, wrap up in your towel, which absorbs moisture about as well as waxed paper, and fumble back into your uniform while still damp. No time for proper drying, someone else is already climbing into the water, possibly with new and interesting germs to share. You retrieve your sliver of soap, which now weighs less than a secret, and prepare to guard it for another week. Back in your cell, you're greeted by the smell of old stone and wet wool, but beneath it all, there's a faint, fleeting sense of accomplishment. You survived bath day. You're cleaner, slightly, and you've lived to tell the tale. In Victorian prison, hygiene isn't about feeling fresh. It's about surviving the ordeal with dignity intact and maybe, just maybe, landing the elusive compliment, "You don't smell half bad today." And honestly, that's the highest praise you can hope for. No Victorian prison would be complete without rats. They scurry across the floor at night, gnawing on anything not nailed down. You try to make peace with your furry roommates. After all, they're just as trapped as you. Rats are the unofficial mascots of prison life. Forget the stern-faced warders or the endless piles of rock. If you want to know what real survival looks like, watch a rat navigate the cell block. They appear at dusk, bold as brass, darting between shadows and moonlight, noses twitching for the scent of leftover bread or, on desperate nights, a particularly flavourful boot. Their confidence is unmatched. You could swear they're mocking you, tiny eyes glinting with secrets as they sidestep your attempts to shoo them away. There's a peculiar etiquette to sharing a cell with rats. At first, you declare war, stomping feet, hurling shoes, inventing elaborate traps from tin cups and string. The rats, however, are old hands at this game. They simply dodge your efforts with the nonchalance of creatures who have seen 100 angry prisoners before you and expect to see 100 more after. After a while, you realize resistance is futile. You switch tactics. Coexistence becomes the new strategy. You find yourself assigning them nicknames. The big grey one with the notched ear becomes General. The quick black one who always shows up at roll call is Sergeant. There's Blondie, a rare pale specimen whose sole purpose seems to be reminding you of life on the outside. Maybe a field, maybe a farmhouse, anywhere but here. You track their nightly routines, how they vanish at the sound of the jailer's boots, how they reappear when the lights dim and all that's left is the gentle snoring of your cellmate. Rats are equal opportunity invaders. They respect neither status nor sentence. Petty thief or seasoned highwayman, everyone gets a share of the rodent action. Some prisoners swear that the rats are spies trained by the guards to report on secret conversations and contraband hiding spots. Others, more poetically, insist the rats are the ghosts of prisoners past, doomed to prowl the cellars forever in search of justice, or at least a decent meal. At night, your ears tune to the background music of rat activity, the soft scrabble of claws on stone, the muffled squeak of an ambitious leap, the occasional crunch as another crust disappears. You tuck your bread under your mattress and hope they won't bother your toes. Sometimes you wake up to the feeling of whiskers brushing against your foot. Your initial horror fades into reluctant acceptance. After all, in a place where comfort is a rare commodity, you're oddly grateful for the warmth, however brief. Rats have their uses too. Their presence is a conversation starter, if only with yourself, a gauge for the state of the cell block. Too many rats, and you know the kitchen's been careless. Too few, and you worry about what drove them away, something even more sinister. Occasionally an enterprising inmate will try to tame a rat, offering a crumb in exchange for entertainment. It rarely works, but for a fleeting moment, you feel almost like a pet owner. Of course, not all prisoners see the bright side. Some take up rat hunting as a hobby, competing to see who can catch the biggest specimen. The guards roll their eyes, mostly unconcerned, unless the rats start stealing from their lunch as well. By morning, the rats are gone, retreated into cracks and corners, leaving behind only a few stray droppings and the faint lingering question, who's really in charge here? You rise, stretch, and prepare to face another day, knowing that tonight your roommates will return. In Victorian prison, rats are more than pests, they're survivors, companions, and the only creatures guaranteed to escape when you can't. If you're lucky, you'll pick up a little of their resourcefulness, and maybe even learn to respect the world's smallest escape artists. Everyone spends time daydreaming about escape. Some plot elaborate schemes involving laundry carts, disguises, or secret tunnels. Most just fantasize about a meal that doesn't crunch unexpectedly. In Victorian prison, the imagination is the only thing left unchained. It's no wonder that after a week or even a day of hard labour, bad bread, and the kind of silence that echoes in your bones, your mind turns to thoughts of freedom. You start small, the classic vision of digging a tunnel with a spoon, a la every story you've ever heard. Never mind that the walls are a foot thick and your only available utensil has already been confiscated twice. You picture yourself sneaking past sleeping warders, darting through shadows and popping up in the vegetable garden, victorious and mud-caked, just in time to steal a turnip and vanish into the fog. You're not alone. Prisoners have always traded stories about the ultimate getaway. There's the tale of Greasy Tom, who supposedly oiled himself up and wriggled through a drain pipe. You suspect the story was started by Tom himself, who is now 3 cells down and much less greasy. Or the rumour of Hollow Ned, who spent months carving out the inside of a laundry cart only to be discovered when he fell asleep and snored during roll call. Escape stories are currency here, shared in hushed tones, exchanged for favours, or whispered for morale when the soup is particularly thin. The creative types invent disguises in their minds, a fake moustache made from laundry lint, a guard's uniform assembled from bits of discarded tunic, and a healthy dose of optimism. The favourite fantasy involves swapping places with the chaplain, shuffling out of the chapel with your head bowed, muttering a prayer for the foolish jailer who didn't check under the hat. Some take it a step further. Letters sent in invisible ink, signals flashed in code, even dreams of hot air balloons constructed from stolen pillowcases and wishful thinking. But most of the time, escape fantasies are about the simple things. You imagine walking through a quiet street. No shackles, no schedule, no bread that could chip a tooth. You daydream about sitting down to a meal where the only surprise is dessert. You let your mind wander through the fields, breathing air that hasn't bounced off 100 stone walls before reaching your lungs. Sometimes you picture yourself in a proper bath, the water hot, the soap endless, and not a rat in sight. Of course, the guards are wise to these daydreams. They watch for secret meetings, whispered plans, the telltale gleam in a prisoner's eye. They double-check the laundry carts, inspect the walls for new scratches, and keep a running tally of how many spoons are accidentally dropped into the coal bucket. The jailer claims he can spot a schemer at 20 paces, and to be fair, the last man who tried to escape made it about 10 before being tackled by a very determined pigeon. But even the guards can't stop you from dreaming. In the quiet moments, lying on your straw mattress, stirring your soup, staring up at the cracks in the ceiling, you rehearse your escape, refining every detail. Each night the plan grows more elaborate, the odds less likely, but your hope just a little stronger. Maybe tomorrow will be the day you find a loose stone, a forgotten key, or a moment when the world conspires in your favour. And in the end, that's the real secret. Sometimes the dream is enough. It lifts you above the monotony, above the grey walls, above the rules and routines. Even if you never make it past the front gate, your mind is free to wander anywhere it wants. In Victorian prison, the body might be confined, but the imagination is always plotting its next great escape. And honestly, that's the most satisfying getaway of all. Despite the silence, news travels fast. Whispers in the yard, coded taps on cell walls, and the universal language of eye rolls keep everyone up to date. The prison grapevine knows everything before the warden does. Communication in Victorian prison is supposed to be strictly forbidden. No talking, no whispering, no conspiring. But human nature is nothing if not persistent, and where there's a will, there's a way. Inside these walls, information is the real currency. Forget bread or smuggled pencils. If you want to survive, you need to know what's going on. And gossip is the only thing that spreads faster than the cold. It starts small. A glance exchanged in the exercise yard, a nod at roll call, the casual clearing of a throat that means ask me later. The real experts, though, have developed a complex network of coded taps and scratches. A rhythmic knock on the pipes can mean anything from bread in the soup today to the night warders in a mood, hide the chess pieces. It's the Morse code of the miserable, and everyone learns it within their first week. Rumours take on a life of their own. No one knows how they start, but everyone helps keep them alive. Did you hear about old Joe in cell 17? He's getting extra rations, must have friends in high places. Is it true that Molly the cook is sweet on the jailer? Suddenly, the soup tastes more like hope than cabbage. Word goes round that there's going to be a surprise inspection. Instantly, every cell is tidier than the warden's own quarters. You'd think the Queen herself was about to pop by for tea. Of course, news doesn't have to be important to be interesting. Someone will always share the details of the latest mouse sighting, or which unlucky soul managed to offend the nurse and was rewarded with an especially aggressive poultice. Prison fashion updates are delivered in low tones. Tom patched his trousers with a sock. Scandalous! And inevitably someone always claims to have seen a rat the size of a small dog. The grapevine also serves as the prison's unofficial agony aunt. Feeling down about your upcoming sentence review? There's a tap code for that. Need advice on hiding the world's tiniest sliver of soap? Whispered tips are passed from veteran to newcomer faster than you can say contraband. Even love finds a way. A shy smile exchanged in chapel. A folded scrap of poetry smuggled inside a sock. Hearts beat just as loudly as rumours. The guards do their best to stamp out this flow of information. They shuffle the cell assignments, interrupt conversations with suspicious frequency, and patrol the yard with ears pricked for any hint of conspiracy. But the truth is, they're almost as invested in the gossip as the inmates are. After all, who else is going to tell them who really stole the extra turnip or why the bread suddenly tastes even staler than usual? Sometimes the rumours are wild, stories of a secret tunnel, a hidden stash of sugar, a prisoner who can predict the next thunderstorm with uncanny accuracy. But even when the tales stretch credulity, they provide the glue that holds the population together. They make the hours pass, give everyone something to look forward to, and remind you that even behind stone walls, people will always find ways to connect. By nightfall, the news has changed hands a dozen times. What started as a passing glance becomes, by bedtime, a full-blown epic. The jailer's hat has gone missing. There's talk of rebellion, and someone swears they heard a violin playing in the infirmary. None of it is official, and most of it is nonsense, but that's hardly the point. In Victorian prison, gossip is survival. It's entertainment, solidarity, therapy, and hope, all wrapped up in one invisible, unstoppable underground newspaper. And as you drift off to sleep, you wonder what tomorrow's headlines will bring. If you're lucky, you might earn time in the prison library, a room filled with dusty books, faded newspapers, and the intoxicating scent of escape. For a few moments you lose yourself in stories about people with bigger problems than yours. The library is the closest thing to paradise you'll find in Victorian prison. It's tucked away in a quiet corner of the building, protected from drafts, drama, and, most miraculously, the relentless sound of keys jingling. The first thing you notice is the silence, but it's not the same stifling hush you get in your cell or on the exercise yard. This is a good silence, heavy with possibility. The air is thick with the smell of old paper, dried glue, and the faintest trace of mildew, like a cake that's been left out in the rain, but one you're still desperate to taste. Shelves line the walls, sagging under the weight of books that have seen more than their fair share of prisoners come and go. Some volumes are missing covers, others are annotated with generations of tiny hopeful graffiti, names, secret jokes, the odd declaration of undying love for the nurse in the infirmary. Every now and then you stumble upon a drawing of a pigeon in a hat, and you wonder if there's a secret society of artistically inclined inmates, united by boredom and very limited resources. The collection is eclectic, to say the least. There are religious tracts with pages stuck together by ancient porridge, battered romance novels, guidebooks to cities you'll never see, and the occasional political treatise with all the juicy bits censored. The favourite book is always the thickest, something you can get lost in for as long as possible. Or, failing that, use to prop up a wobbly stool in your cell. Someone once found a book about cake recipes. It was read so many times that the pages crumbled, leaving nothing but a population of prisoners who could recite Victorian sponge by heart but had never tasted one. Access to the library is a privilege, not a right. You earn it with good behaviour. Days without complaints, a week without losing your temper, a month of perfect silent shuffling. When your turn finally comes, you cherish every second. You sit at a long wooden table, sun streaming through a window thick with grime, and open a book with a reverence usually reserved for confession or pudding. For a little while, the world outside falls away. You're no longer prisoner number 242. You're an explorer in Egypt, a knight in shining armour, a woman who owns more than one dress and never has to scrub laundry with a brick. There's a quiet camaraderie in the library. Inmates nod to each other across the stacks, trading recommendations and reviewing plot twists with a series of meaningful eyebrow raises. No one wants to risk the wrath of the librarian, a guard with a fondness for Dickens and a belief in the civilizing power of silence, so all communication is done in whispers or silent hand gestures. Occasionally, someone tries to smuggle a book back to their cell, only to have it confiscated and returned with a lecture about the common good. The best part of library time is the afterglow. When your session ends and you're marched back to your cell, you carry the stories with you. They linger in your mind, bright and stubborn, helping you through another evening of straw bedding and chamber pots. You replay plot lines, invent sequels, imagine yourself as the hero or villain, depending on the mood of the day. Sometimes, a single sentence sticks with you for weeks, a lifeline thrown across the grey expanse of routine. In Victorian prison, the library isn't just a room, it's a window, a tunnel, a secret door. It's proof that even when your body's locked away, your mind can go anywhere. And for a little while, that's more than enough. As the day ends, you shuffle back to your cell, climb onto your creaky bed, and wrap yourself in a blanket that smells faintly of cabbage. Sleep comes slowly, if at all, interrupted by snores, shouts, and the occasional rodent visit. Nighttime in Victorian prison isn't so much a chance to rest as it is a masterclass in endurance. After a day of roll calls, hard labour, and the sort of meals that haunt your dreams in entirely the wrong way, the prospect of lying down feels like a reward until you actually do it. The straw mattress groans beneath you, its contents shifting into uncomfortable new arrangements. You try to smooth out the lumps and discover a bonus prize, a hidden pebble, a mysterious feather, or, if you're really unlucky, something that once belonged to your cellmate. Each night the bedding reveals a new personality, and none of them are charming. You pull the blanket tight, tucking your feet against the cold. The fabric is stiff, worn at the edges, and, for reasons unknown, always carries a faint aroma of last week's vegetables. You wonder, not for the first time, if blankets are washed, or simply swapped from cell to cell, like a particularly questionable game of musical chairs. Still, it's better than nothing. Barely. The cell block settles into a symphony of nighttime noises. There's the soft patter of rats scurrying in the shadows, the metallic groan of water pipes, and the endless chorus of snores rising and falling like a badly tuned orchestra. Someone mutters in their sleep, reliving an argument with a jailer, or perhaps simply ordering a better meal. In the distance, a late-arriving guard's boots tap out a rhythm of authority, a lullaby for the deeply institutionalized. Privacy is, as always, a luxury you can't afford. Your cellmate, if you have one, shifts and sighs, a restless bundle of regrets and elbows. You learn quickly to sleep defensively, one arm curled protectively over your meagre stash of possessions, the other ready to nudge away any adventurous rodents. Sometimes you wake up just as a small, whiskered face is retreating from your bread supply, and you have to decide whether you're more annoyed at the theft or impressed by the daring. Falling asleep takes practice and a healthy dose of denial. You try counting sheep but end up counting every slight pain in your back instead. You tell yourself stories of freedom, of feasts, of beds so soft you sink into them like a well-fed cat. Sometimes you recite passages from a book you borrowed during your rare trip to the library, clinging to words as if they're talismans against the darkness. Inevitably, just as you're drifting off, someone in the next cell breaks the spell. A shout, a nightmare, a sudden call for the nurse. The jailer barks a warning. The whole block stirs, grumbles, and then settles again, a tide of frustration rising and falling. You sigh, pull your blanket tighter, and shift onto your other side, convinced that perhaps this position will finally convince your body to surrender to sleep. When sleep does come, it's a strange, fitful thing, full of fragmented dreams and abrupt awakenings. Sometimes you find yourself wandering in fields, sometimes you're late for roll call, sometimes you're simply running, endlessly, with no walls in sight. Even in your dreams, escape is always just out of reach. And then, far too soon, the first hint of dawn creeps through your tiny window. The cold seeps back in. The cell stirs to life. Regret and rancid straw remain, faithful companions on the long road through another day. But for a few precious hours, you manage to find a kind of rest, even if it came in pieces, tucked inside a blanket that still, somehow, smells faintly of cabbage. In Victorian prison, sleep is just another challenge, and when you manage to grab it, another small unlikely victory. In the darkness, you dream of life outside these walls, fresh air, soft bread, laughter. Sometimes you wake up, just for a moment, thinking you're free. But the morning bell rings, and reality returns, reminding you that tomorrow is just another day in Victorian prison. Sleep is the only place where the walls fall away. As exhaustion drags you under, you find yourself wandering lanes lined with wildflowers, sunlight warming your face, the air carrying the distant hum of everyday life. There's no roll call, no jailer's glare, no looming threat of hard labour, just the delicious uncertainty of a world that might for once go your way. You dream of ordinary things, a familiar street, a loaf of bread that doesn't chip your teeth, a pair of shoes that fit. In sleep, even the simplest pleasures become grand adventures. Sometimes your dreams are bold. You scale the prison wall with the grace of a cat, leap into the waiting arms of freedom, and run through the streets laughing, light, utterly unstoppable. Friends and family gather to greet you, and the table is set with everything you've missed. Fresh butter, real jam, soup thick enough to stand a spoon in. For a few blissful moments, you are whole again. But not every dream is sweet. Some nights, your mind dredges up every fear and failure, replaying them in glorious, high-definition misery. You dream of being caught at the wall, of falling from a ladder that never quite reaches the top. Sometimes the jailer's keyring follows you, jingling through every alley and field, the sound growing louder until you jolt awake, heart racing, convinced the chase will never end. Other times, your dreams are stranger still. You find yourself back in the yard, surrounded by pigeons dressed as prison officials, doling out bread rations and passing judgment with a single, stern coo. Your cellmate turns into a rat and lectures you on the merits of positive thinking. The soup comes alive and tries to escape. You run, you hide, you laugh in spite of yourself, because even your nightmares have a sense of the absurd. There are nights when hope sneaks in quietly, tucking itself into the corner of your mind. You dream of a letter arriving, of a visitor's kind eyes, of a day when the doors finally open. Sometimes you wake up blinking in the dark, convinced for a fleeting second that you're home. You reach out expecting soft sheets and familiar smells, only to meet the cold stone of your cell and the scent of straw and cabbage. Disappointment is swift, but hope lingers, stubborn, persistent, the one thing the jailer can't confiscate. You listen to the breathing of those around you, cellmates, rats, the whole building alive with a restless sleep. Somewhere, someone mutters a name in their dreams. Someone else laughs, a sound quickly swallowed by the darkness. It's in these moments, half awake and half dreaming, that you remember. You're not alone in your longing. Every prisoner here carries their own secret dreams of freedom, folded up and hidden against the world's sharp edges. Then, all too soon, the bell clangs, harsh and undeniable, dragging you back to reality. The familiar routine waits. Roll call, hard labour, the silent system, the jailer's perpetual frown. Another day in Victorian prison, another chance for small rebellions and tiny victories. You rise, stretch, and tuck your dreams away, saving them for the next quiet night, the next flicker of hope. Because as long as you can dream, you're still a little bit free. And in a place built to crush the spirit, that small freedom is everything. So you keep dreaming of soft bread, open skies, and laughter that doesn't echo off stone. And tomorrow, when the morning bell rings again, you'll carry those dreams with you into the day, ready to start the cycle all over. Once in a blue moon, the menu changes, usually because it's Queen Victoria's birthday or the prison accountant miscounted the number of dead pigeons. Suddenly, there's a slice of something labelled meat pie, though you're not convinced it's ever met an actual animal. The taste? Imagine beef, if beef spent its whole life as a rumour. In the world of Victorian prison cuisine, variety is the stuff of legend. Most days you subsist on a cycle of gruel, soup and bread with the density of guilt, so the mere whisper of a special meal is enough to cause excitement, skepticism, and mild gastrointestinal anxiety in equal measure. News of the upcoming feast spreads through the cell block faster than contraband tobacco. "Special dinner," someone whispers at roll call. "Real meat," another hisses in the laundry room. Hopes rise, stomachs rumble, and the most optimistic inmates daydream about a roast, potatoes, or perhaps, even more unlikely, a second helping. When the day arrives, the kitchen is alive with an energy you haven't seen since the last time a rat tried to unionize. The air carries a whiff of something unfamiliar and vaguely promising. You line up with your tin plate, clutching your place in the queue as if your life depends on it, because for once it might. At the serving table, the cook ladles out thick slices of meat pie, each one steaming and mysterious, its crust golden brown and suspiciously uniform. You eye your portion warily. It wobbles slightly. A good sign? You're not sure. Back at the communal tables, everyone takes a moment to appreciate the spectacle. The crust, if nothing else, is a welcome change from standard issue bread. You break it open and inhale deeply. There's the faintest hint of spice, a whiff of onion, and a smell that could generously be described as meaty. Forks are distributed for the occasion, though their tines are so bent with age you're tempted to use them as hair combs instead. You take a bite. The flavour is complicated. On the one hand, it's undeniably hot and savoury. On the other, it's hard to pin down what exactly you're eating. The meat is stringy, and you're pretty sure it once had legs, but whose? You chew thoughtfully, tasting hints of potato, onion, and what might be sage, or maybe just optimism. There's a chewy bit that could be gristle or a root vegetable playing dress-up. You exchange glances with your neighbour, silently agreeing to accept the miracle without asking questions. For a few moments, the room is alive with cautious delight. Conversations buzz as prisoners reminisce about meals from their former lives. Someone tells a story about their mother's Sunday roast. Another brags about a bakery in Southwark with pies you'd gladly go to jail for. Even the guards, usually immune to the excitement, seem a little less grumpy as they watch the rare spectacle of prisoners eating with genuine enthusiasm, or at least genuine curiosity. But the magic doesn't last. By the time you've finished your slice, reality creeps back in. The filling cools, the mystery deepens, and you start to suspect that the meat was, at best, an actor hired for the role. Still, your belly is fuller than usual, and you find yourself grinning at nothing in particular. For once, you don't race to scrape every crumb from your plate. You linger, savouring the last bites, knowing it might be months before the menu changes again. As you shuffle back to your cell, the whispers start anew. Was it beef? Was it rat? Did someone sneak in a pigeon? It hardly matters. In Victorian prison, a special meal isn't about what you eat, but the fleeting moment of hope it delivers. For a single evening, you got to pretend you were somewhere else, celebrating, feasting, and laughing with friends. And tomorrow, when the gruel returns, you'll remember this meal, not for its taste, but for its power to make you feel just a little less like a prisoner and a little more like a person. Believe it or not, you can learn a thing or two behind bars, mostly reading, writing, and creative ways to regret your life choices. The schoolroom is a drafty annex filled with mismatched desks and the overwhelming aroma of chalk dust and second-hand disappointment. Here, sums and spelling tests compete with the endless urge to daydream about freedom, or at least about warmer socks. Education in a Victorian prison isn't what you'd call enlightened. It's less about personal growth and more about reform through rote memorization. The theory goes that if you can read the rules, maybe, just maybe, you'll follow them. The schoolroom itself is a sort of intellectual purgatory. A dozen crooked desks, ink stains older than your sentence, and a chalkboard that lists the alphabet, a few multiplication tables, and the warden's favourite saying, "Silence is golden, disobedience is expensive." Lessons begin with the teacher, a harried soul who oscillates between sternness and despair, calling the class to attention. You sit up straight, or as straight as a bench with one short leg will allow, and try to look eager. Your fellow students range from hardened pickpockets to confused country folk, all united by a single truth. Nobody asked to be here, and everyone would rather be somewhere else. First, reading. You recite from battered primers, stumbling over words like benevolence and consequence. The teacher corrects you, sometimes gently, sometimes with the subtlety of a thrown chalk eraser. Some prisoners are secretly grateful for the chance to finally learn their letters. Others mouth along, eyes glazed, already composing their next great escape plan in the back of their minds. Next comes writing. You grip a blunt pencil and scratch out your name, your crime, or, if feeling bold, a secret message to the next occupant of your desk. The writing paper is thin, the ink watery, and every mistake feels magnified. You're told that penmanship reflects character. Judging by your neighbour's handwriting, half the cell block is destined for sainthood, the other half for a life of crime again. Arithmetic is where the real pain begins. Columns of numbers stretch across the page like rows of tiny bars. Addition and subtraction come easily enough, but division is another matter entirely. The teacher is relentless. If you have 5 pieces of bread and give 2 away, how many are left? The class sighs, wishing for such abundance. Someone mutters, "Depends. Are there rats?" The teacher pretends not to hear. The day's lessons are punctuated by chalk squeaks, desk rattles, and the occasional well-aimed spitball, always denied, never proven. Distractions abound. You watch the dust motes swirl in the weak sunlight, count the cracks in the ceiling, or try to decipher the graffiti carved by generations of students who have come and gone. Some of the carvings are spelling tests in themselves. Mrs. Jenkins's of the rest has been scratched out, probably for the best. Discipline in the classroom is strict. Whispering earns a glare. Laughter gets you assigned to blackboard cleaning, a task made more miserable by the soap, which smells like regret and lingers for days. Still, there are moments of triumph. The first time you read a whole sentence without stumbling. The rare occasion when you spell Victorian correctly. The surprising satisfaction of a perfectly balanced equation. By the end of the lesson, your mind is numb, your fingers stained, and your seat numb from the unyielding bench. Yet despite the discomfort, something sticks. Maybe it's the knowledge that you're not quite as hopeless as you thought, or maybe it's just the discovery that learning can be a rebellion of its own. Proof that, even locked away, you're still capable of change. As the schoolroom empties and you shuffle back to your cell, you carry with you a new word, a fresh regret, and a lingering hope that tomorrow's lesson might finally include a break for tea, or at least for warmer socks. In Victorian prison, education is hard won, but at the very least it keeps your mind one step ahead of your sentence. Every so often the chaplain makes his rounds, armed with a Bible, a stern expression, and an uncanny ability to ask exactly the questions you don't want to answer. His mission, to save souls, comfort the afflicted, and if time permits, politely remind everyone that complaining about the gruel is not technically a sin, but it is highly discouraged. The chaplain's arrival in the cell block brings a different kind of energy. A hush falls as word spreads, carried in a chain of raised eyebrows and the discreet adjustment of hair and posture. For many, he's a welcome break in the monotony, a rare visitor not holding a key or barking an order. For others, he's simply another authority figure to navigate, like the jailer, but with a gentler accent and a fondness for quoting scripture at inconvenient moments. He always begins with the formalities, wishing good morning whether it's raining, snowing, or the sort of grey that makes you forget seasons even exist. He asks about your health, your progress, your spiritual journey, all with the kind of earnestness that suggests he genuinely wants you to be saved, or at the very least moderately less grumpy. You try to answer honestly, but the chaplain has a way of making even simple admissions feel like confessions. "How's your heart?" he'll ask, and you're never sure whether he means physically, emotionally, or if he somehow heard about the time you pinched an extra slice of bread from the kitchen. He listens, nods gravely, and occasionally slips in a gentle reminder about forgiveness, humility, or the importance of gratitude, even when the only thing you're grateful for is that today's soup wasn't the worst you've ever had. There are moments when his presence is genuinely comforting. He has a knack for sitting quietly, letting you fill the silence with whatever you need to say, or simply not saying anything at all. Sometimes he'll read aloud, a psalm, a proverb, or, if the mood is particularly grim, a passage about suffering with dignity. His voice is steady, soothing, and for a few minutes the stone walls fade, replaced by the kind of peace you imagine exists in proper churches, with stained glass and cushions on the pews. The chaplain is also a master of small talk. He inquires after your family, your hobbies, even the quality of the prison bread, though he already knows the answer. He shares news from the outside, tidbits about local festivals, or updates on the Queen's health, For a few precious moments, you're reminded that the world is still turning out there, and people are worrying about things other than how to keep the soap from dissolving entirely before next bath day. Of course, there's a limit to his patience for complaints. Start in on the food, and he'll smile sympathetically before steering the conversation back to more uplifting ground. Suggest that the jailer is actually a demon in human form, and he'll gently advise turning the other cheek, even if the other cheek already has a bruise. He's a believer in redemption, but he also knows when he's being tested. Sometimes, the chaplain brings letters or news from home, delivering them with a kind of solemn ceremony that makes even a shopping list feel momentous. He passes along messages from loved ones, promises to say a prayer for your sick aunt, or simply offers a kind word to those whose mail never seems to arrive. His kindness is never flashy, but it's remembered long after he's moved on to the next cell. When he finally leaves, he wishes you strength and peace, and perhaps a little more patience with your neighbours. You watch him go, Bible under one arm, hope under the other, and realise that even in a place designed to strip away dignity, a few words can help stitch it back together. In Victorian prison, the chaplain is a rare visitor, one who offers salvation, a sympathy, and, on a good day, a blessed 5 minutes away from thinking about gruel. And honestly, that might just be enough to get you through to tomorrow. Life in prison breeds creativity. Forget the movies. Real contraband is usually less about files and cakes and more about secret pencil stubs, an extra scrap of string, or a precious button-turned chess piece. You learn to hide things where even the rats wouldn't look. Smuggling hope, it turns out, is a skill, sometimes the only one that keeps you sane. Victorian prison isn't exactly built for comfort, but it's surprisingly good at encouraging ingenuity. Denied life's usual pleasures, prisoners become connoisseurs of the forbidden and the forgotten. Each small item, every unauthorized possession, is a tiny rebellion against the grey sameness of stone walls and daily routine. Some smuggle in scraps from the laundry, others trade for bits of charcoal, dried crusts of bread, or, on rare and magical occasions, a stub of pencil wrapped in layers of hope. Contraband is never flashy. There are no grand escapes powered by a single stolen spoon, no elaborate tunnels dug with a silver fork. Instead, the currency of prison life is subtlety. You become an expert in the art of hiding, sewing an extra button inside your tunic, tucking a length of thread into a hollow in your bed frame, folding notes so small they can be slipped between bricks without a trace. Even the rats, seasoned veterans of concealment, look on with admiration at some of your more daring hiding places. A favourite among the creative set is the chess set carved from bread and buttons. Each pawn, bishop and knight tells a story. This one rescued from the laundry, that one traded for a secret message, another whittled from a bone left over from meat pie day. The board is scratched into the surface of a stool, or, if you're feeling bold, traced in dust on the floor. Every game is a risk, every move a calculated act of defiance against boredom. Pencils and paper are the crown jewels of contraband. Even a nub of graphite can be used to write letters, poems, or, if you're artistically inclined, caricatures of the jailer. Messages are passed hand to hand, cell to cell, encoded in doodles or hidden inside official requests for soap. Some prisoners even compose stories, writing chapter by chapter, each page tucked away in the spine of a book or inside a hollowed-out heel. Soap, surprisingly, is another treasured commodity. The meagre ration provided by the guards disappears quickly, sometimes lost in the laundry, sometimes borrowed by a cellmate. Extra soap is worth its weight in gold, traded for favours or used to bribe a particularly strict laundry trustee. It's said that you can tell who has the best connections in the prison by the way they smell, if at all. Of course, not all contraband is practical. Some items are purely sentimental, a scrap of fabric embroidered with initials, a pebble that reminds you of home, a bent nail you swear was once part of a horse's bridle. These objects are tokens, reminders that you're still a person, not just a number in the jailer's book. They're kept hidden from the guards, but shown proudly to trusted friends, proof that hope survives even in the unlikeliest places. The guards, for their part, are constantly on the lookout. Cell searches are common, hands patting down beds and sifting through straw in search of forbidden treasure. Some are efficient, others lazy, and a few seem to appreciate the ingenuity of what they find, confiscating with a sigh and occasionally a wink. The game never really ends. For every item lost, another appears, born from necessity and a stubborn refusal to surrender to monotony. In the end, It's not the objects themselves that matter, but what they represent: creativity, resistance, and hope. In Victorian prison, these scraps and secrets are more valuable than gold. They're a lifeline to the outside world, a promise that, despite the odds, you still have something of your own. And that's a victory worth hiding, no matter how small. Over time, you discover that even the strictest silence can't stop friendships from forming. There's the quiet guy who always saves you a seat in the chapel, the woman who smuggles extra bread, and the one who insists they're innocent, but everyone knows they stole the governor's hat. Friendships here are forged in boredom, tested by rumours, and occasionally ended by arguments over the last clean spoon. In Victorian prison, camaraderie grows like a weed, uninvited, persistent, and a bit miraculous given the daily dose of enforced isolation. You're not meant to talk, but human nature has other plans. A wink, a sigh, a tap on the wall, these are the seeds of connection. One day, you're strangers standing in line for watery soup. The next, you're partners in the silent choreography of laundry duty, or co-conspirators in the great soap swap of Cell Block C. The alliances are rarely planned. Sometimes it starts with a shared complaint about the bread, a sympathetic glance after a rough day at the crank, or a discreet swap of a slightly less threadbare blanket. The best friendships are built on small acts of generosity, half a heel of bread, a loaned pencil nub, a tip about when the jailer is most likely to nod off on night shift. Trust is always cautious and incremental. You never forget that rumours spread faster than influenza, and an ill-placed word can earn you extra duty, or worse, solitary. Your friends become your lifeline. There's the wiry, sharp-eyed fellow who can communicate a full sentence with nothing but a raised eyebrow. There's the motherly type who manages to conjure comfort from rags and optimism, always ready with an encouraging squeeze of the shoulder when the guards aren't looking. Some friendships span across cells, conversations through pipes, coded knocks, or notes smuggled in rolled-up laundry. Others bloom in the exercise yard, where the shuffle of feet and the stern eyes of guards can't quite keep hope at bay. And of course, every friendship group has its characters. The prison gossip who somehow knows everyone's story, including what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago. The strategist forever plotting, never succeeding, new escape routes or ingenious ways to sneak an extra ration of soap. The peacemaker who mediates disputes over bunks and tries to keep spirits high with dubious jokes. And the hopeless romantic who swears that love letters can be successfully delivered if you fold them into a pigeon-shaped origami and whisper the right kind of prayer. But even the best of alliances are subject to prison's unique brand of drama. The silent system means that misunderstandings fester. One missed signal, one piece of bread left unshared, and suddenly you're embroiled in a cold war over bunk territory, or whose turn it is for the less rancid blanket. Epic falling outs happen, sometimes over actual insults, often over imagined slights. The Great Spoon incident of last winter, the day every prisoner claimed the last clean utensil, still gets whispered about, a cautionary tale of greed and grudges. Yet, more often than not, time heals even the silliest of rifts. In the closed world of the prison, you can't afford enemies for long. Shared misery, after all, is the ultimate glue. A new hardship, a sudden guard inspection, or just the need for someone to scratch that impossible spot on your back usually brings old friends back together. Forgiveness is practical, if not always heartfelt. At night you take stock, a smile from the bread smuggler, a nod from the governor's hat thief, a laugh with the incorrigible optimist. Against the background of stone walls, rationed light, and the ever-present shadow of the jailer, these bonds are small rebellions. Friendships might not make the soup taste better or the blankets softer, but they remind you that, even here, you're still capable of caring and being cared for. In Victorian prison, alliances are as unlikely as they are essential. They're the family you didn't choose, the comic relief in the bleakest drama, and sometimes, just sometimes, the reason you get out of bed and face another day. Even if, for the sake of peace, you always volunteer to wash the spoons. As the lantern light fades down the corridor and the echoes of boots finally drift away, your long Victorian prison day comes to an end. You've survived the bell, the silence, the labour, the gruel, the uniforms that fought back, and the ever-present feeling that time itself was moving slower just to mess with you. You shuffled, you waited, you endured, and somehow that was enough. Life inside a Victorian prison wasn't about rehabilitation or reflection in the modern sense. It was about discipline, routine, and breaking the spirit down into something quiet and compliant. Every stone wall, every rule, every tasteless meal was designed to remind you of where you stood in the world and how small your choices could suddenly become. And yet, even here, people adapted. They found meaning in tiny things: a whispered joke, a stolen glance, a scrap of paper, a moment of warmth near a stove, a book that carried them somewhere else for a while. Even in a place built to strip people down, humanity had a stubborn way of leaking through the cracks. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, clean sheets, soft pillows, no rats negotiating rent, take a quiet second to appreciate it. Appreciate the silence you choose, the food you don't have to earn with a hammer, the fact that you can speak whenever you want without a whistle blowing your piece apart. Because history may be grim, uncomfortable, and deeply unfair, but it's also proof that people endure far more than we think they can. They adapt, they survive, they make it through another day, even when the walls close in. So let the prison gates fade back into history. Let the stone dissolve into darkness. And as you drift off to sleep, remember, you made it back. And tomorrow morning the bell doesn't get to wake you up.